is that the European Convention, which is what the European Court implemented, was actually written by Britain. It's actually written by Conservatives. It was written by a man who went on to be a Conservative Lord Chancellor. And it's got things in it which are very British, like, you know, the right to free speech, the right to freedom of association, the right not to be discriminated against, the right to a fair trial. I think what has happened is that some of the decisions of the courts have been very good. Some of them people think have gone too far. But I don't, for myself, think that's a reason for saying, right, we're having nothing more to do with it.
Noreena, what do you think about all this?
Well,
You've been following it.
I definitely have been following it, and I think a couple of points to make about the story, the wording, the language in the Telegraph. Extraordinary claims being considered by Strasbourg, making sure that they get into the paragraph terrorists, paedophiles, rapists, killers, when in fact this is just a case being brought before the court. We don't know yet how it's going to rule, but already trying to get a kind of panic going, inflammatory language, getting people scared. And I think, like Lord Goldsmith, that this is actually really about trying to highlight we don't want to be part of Europe in general, and we don't want to be part of the European Court for Human Rights, forgetting that actually for all of us, having the ability, if something went wrong with any of our governments, having the ability to go to Europe and to fight a case on our own behalf is something that I think we shouldn't throw away without thinking, because there have been lots of cases in history where actually people have rightly brought cases against their own states to the European Court.
Okay, well, it's a debate I'm going to be having later on this programme, so we'll move on. But you've got a story, haven't you, Noreena, on women and directorships in our top companies, because Lord Davis has been looking at this issue, and I mean, there's just such a small number of women in top jobs, particularly in FTSE 100 companies, and those slightly smaller.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Dermot. I mean, at the moment, only 12.5% of FTSE 100 directors are women, and if you look at the FTSE 250, you see that it's virtually none. That drops to single figures. So what Lord Davis has done is he's been looking into this issue of should there be mandatory, what should we do about getting more women on boards? I feel that he is not going far enough, because he is, it looks like, going to come out with a voluntary target for companies that they should have between 20 and 30% of women on boards. But the countries where we actually see real progress on this issue are Norway, Spain, some other Scandinavian countries, and in all of these they've had mandatory quotas.
Legislation, quotas.
Yeah, they've said, you know what, we can't keep on waiting. If we keep on waiting, we will never have women at the levels they're needed.
Kelly?
And I mean,
you agree? I mean, force of law. I mean, you can't trust these companies to do it themselves.
Well, I sit on Women's Sport Fitness Foundation, a commission for sport, and we're looking into exactly the same in management roles and boards within sport and organisations. The FA, we're kind of hammering to say, you know, where's your representation? Of course, all of the national governing bodies of sport, and it's really poor, actually, you know, where these posts are coming from. And so I do think it is across the board an issue that needs to be tackled.
Funnily enough, though, on the issue of quotas, I mean, I was just talking to David Willits, obviously on a different subject, but, you know, talking about fair access to universities and how progressive his policy was, saying, well, you know, we're not going to force universities to take more state school students effectively because we're against quotas. So, I mean, that's the government position, although in that article it says that eventually David Cameron, you know, might bring in quotas.
Yes, but I think the trouble with any voluntary regulation is, unless you state very clearly, okay, within a year we expect companies to apply voluntarily, and if they don't, X, Y and Z is going to happen. But you need to have something kind of quite clear and punitive for them not to comply if you want voluntary regulation to be taken seriously.
Kelly, your next story, I guess, is related in some way.
Well, it leads on a bit of it, yes. In the Sunday Times, page 6, modesty and low ambition keep women out of top jobs. Well, I think I'm going to stand up. It says actually here, a lack of ambition and self-confidence rather than overt male sexism is holding women back from senior management roles, according to research. Now, I think, you know, if you look at some women in lead and power, they're going to look at that and say, absolutely no. But I think sometimes it's about opportunity. Men would probably look at their lives as a success through their work, whereas women, obviously it's the family. If they have family members, and that's going to be something that they then feel is maybe a limited or barrier to them really getting at high places within their own roles and jobs. But so then it adds to what Noreen was saying about the positions and where they sit. But, you know, personally, as a woman who is driven, you know, will go against anything to be the best they can be, whether it's business, sport, I think there's a lot like me out there. So I think, I mean, Noreen, we were having a debate earlier, weren't we?
I want to ask, well, we've got the legal expert here as well. What about legislating for this kind of thing?
Well,
you know, discussing the quotas and creating that ambition.
I mean, sometimes legislating for that is the right solution because you can't make changes otherwise. But it does have real problems with it, not least that if you have a legislative requirement, if you have a statutory requirement to have a woman on the board or several women on the board, it actually demeans them too. Because often, I've heard people say, I don't want to be thought of as here only because I have to be here. Now, I entirely agree with the ambition, but I think what this story, Kelly's story, demonstrates is there may be other issues there which one has to deal with as well as the legislative.
We put the two stories together, isn't it? About yes, of course you want to be there on merit, but you're also feeling that, well, I'm not really wanted here. I don't really fit in here because of the culture that there is around this company or whatever organisation it is.
But it's not a legal question, I don't think, and I think that, you know, as a man who's always had it easy, it's much easier for men to be mediocre and self-confident about it, I think, because that's the sort of world that we live in. We don't seem to suffer from this same disadvantage. Much more difficult for us really to see this the same way that women may.
Okay, Lord Goldsmith, you've got. So I want to move on because we've got to cover this the what's going on in the Middle East and North Africa, particularly at the moment in Libya, about which, you know, we're hearing some awful things, but finding out not too much because of the nature of the society and the government there.
Well, that's what's interesting because, of course, you know, we're seeing stories as well that the Libyan government, Gaddafi, is actually blocking Al Jazeera. He's blocking news coming out. And the different reaction that we're seeing from the different regimes is very interesting. In Bahrain, the Crown Prince is sort of talking, he's recognising that there needs to be some sort of dialogue with the protesters, whereas in Libya, Gaddafi is bringing out high-velocity guns, he's shooting, some reports, up to 200 people, and appears to be trying to bedding himself in absolutely, not discussing the issues that arise at all. I mean, we've got the Foreign Secretary coming up on the programme, we'll be discussing that with him. Noreena, your next story comes from the News of the World, is it? Yes.
Yes. It's about the NHS cuts that this government seems to be just about to implement, claiming the News of the World claiming that the election promise to save dozens of hospitals from the axe is a sham. I think this raises a much bigger issue about what is going on with the NHS and what the government's policies are for reform. And I'm very concerned, having spoken to many senior doctors and surgeons and medical experts, that Andrew Lansley is really trying to implement very experimental procedures that could disastrously ruin the NHS.
So you're on the radical side of it, because, you know, it's the interpretation, some saying it's the most radical reform since the NHS was set up, and
radical and dangerous.
Dangerous. Now, why dangerous?
Well,
I mean, do you think, for instance, that the doctors do not want these powers of commissioning?
Yes, I mean, when it comes to the commissioning, over half of GPs are saying that they don't want it. The British Medical Journal has called these reforms mad. So you've got the medical establishment themselves having real problems. And doctors, you know, if you go to your GP, you trust him to tell you if you've got a cold. You trust him to send you to a specialist for a diagnosis. But GPs haven't been trained to manage huge £1 million budgets. They don't want to be managing them. And another real concern here is that with the reforms as they currently are configured, there's going to be a real danger that nobody's going to be doing medical research, because at the moment research is coming out of NHS hospitals, and we have a fantastic tradition in this country of doing incredible research. We've had advances on how aspirin is used to treat people, on CT scanners. This is all coming out of NHS hospitals. There is no way at the moment that it looks like the cuts are going to protect the research that this country has got a history of really leading the way.
Okay, I'm turning an economist's brain on that for us. Kelly Holmes, News of the World. You've got
That's right, I'm trying to scan through it, so I'll just try to remember the actual story. Yeah, it was True Grit. Is this the bravest man in Britain? I think for me, this guy, and I can't find paper here, but this guy, there's obviously some robbers, 2 robbers. One had attacked or gone into the jewellers, started threatening the shopkeeper, taking loaded gold chains, and they were chased out. And then this guy here on the left, I mean, we need to find this guy.
We do. Well, I think we need to find the guy with the gun as well.
Well, we need to find both of them, and it's great that we've got his face right there, I'm sure.
But there we have, yes, and then in the circle, the highlighted there, that he's actually carrying a gun. There seems to have been a spate of these kind of stories. We had that little old lady in Northampton the other day, didn't she?
But I think what this shows me is, in society, should we be having a go at this? And my personal opinion is that until we actually stand up, there's a lot of people in society that don't want people robbing banks, don't want people causing crime. And so actually, if you see people saying, hold on, it's not good enough. I know there's a risk, of course. Whether that gun was loaded or not is a different matter.
Well, he doesn't know that,
He doesn't know that. And so obviously there's that whole risk
but I mean,
about your life.
Police advice is, generally don't have a go.
Yeah.
In certain
No, but look at the old lady. I mean, she did it.
But for all those stories, there are also the stories of the people who've done it and have ended up in tragic circumstances.
But then I see situations where there's someone being beaten up on the floor and people just stand there.
But then we get back to human rights again. When if you use excessive force against the alleged criminal, therefore you can end up. I just wanted. There's one other story that I know you've been looking at, Lord Goldsmith. Quite interesting, coming from the Labour Party, and the idea of filling in forms before you speak.
It's a fantastic Mail on Sunday story, this. Because I don't think it amounts to anything. It's a story about they've discovered that there's a form which minister or shadow ministers need to fill in before they speak, saying what we've said about this before, what we're about to say. Now, all political parties have always tried to have a degree of control over what their senior spokesmen say. All this may demonstrate.
We all remember the old pages that New Labour
used to have. Pages, the whole operation from Millbank, and it's actually quite important that if you've got someone who's speaking for a party, there should be some degree of unanimity as to what they're going to say. I suspect what this may be telling us more about is 2 things. First of all, that people love the idea that it's actually Ed Balls in control, and that's what this story is alleging.
Yes, indeed.
And secondly, maybe the Labour Party is running out of money.
Well, do you know what, Lord Goldsmith, I'm going to try that out because we've got Sadiq Khan, the Shadow Justice Minister, coming in, so I'll be asking him if he's been pre-authorised to say what he's saying. We have to end this great discussion here. Thank you very much indeed, Lord Goldsmith, Noreena Hertz, and Dame Kelly Holmes.
Thank you.
All taking us through the papers there. And this is Sky News on our website, skynews.com. Keep up with all the latest political gossip on our Bolton & Co blog. And coming up after MPs reject prisoners' rights to vote, is it time for Britain to break away